Business is simultaneously one of the simplest things in the world, but also one of the most complex and overwhelming for a lot of people. Now, if you're watching this, depending on where you are on your journey, if you're just starting out or maybe you already have a business, you might be experiencing this. And what I'm going to share with you today is a concept, a frame that I think will give you a way of conceptualizing the game of business to make it more consumable, make it more something that you can wrap your head around, and you won't feel so overwhelmed trying to hold it all into your head. Because there's for a lot of people, they're like, there's just so many things that I have to do in my business. I have to, I have to do my LLC, my registration, my bank. I got to set my website, my business card. I have to go to the networking events. I have to, run ads. I have to do this, that, the other thing. There's just so many pieces to the puzzle that it can just feel so overwhelming that you get just mired into the muck and you can't actually make any forward progress, because the idea of tackling the whole thing is just too overwhelming. And so you get that analysis by paralysis that we want to avoid. And so here's the idea, the frame that I want you to think about. And this was something that my girlfriend taught me a couple years ago when her and I first started dating back in 2017, 2018. We were nerds. Well, we're still nerds. We met for our first date at a board game center where you go and you play board games, like Settlers of Catan or Terraforming Mars, right? Like these complex board games. And she was a very big board game nerd, whereas I had been playing board games for a long time, but I wasn't so deeply admired in that world. I was more of a chess player, which is a board game, but very, very different. And I never understood why it felt so different playing a game like Terraforming Mars or Settlers of Catan versus a game like chess. And she explained it to me. She goes, board games, the modern board game that people like to play now, Monopoly, those other ones that I mentioned, they're games that are very complex from a rules perspective, but they're actually very strategically shallow. Once you understand the rules, once you wrap your head around all the little different pieces and widgets and all the different cards and the different turns and all that stuff, and that takes a while to figure out. Once you have that, the basic strategy is fairly straightforward. It's fairly simple. And so these games, they take a long time to learn, but a very short time to master. Whereas a game like chess, one of the appeals of chess and one of the reasons it's, transcended space and time over the last 1,000 years is simply that it's a very simple game that has a ton of depth, a ton of strategic depth. And so there's the pieces and they only move in so many ways, and you can teach a child how to play this game in the span of, an hour. But to master chess can take you a lifetime. And even then, you still are only scratching the surface of the potential that the game has, because it's simple, but infinitely deep. Whereas modern board games are largely complex, but shallow. And so the one takes a while to learn, but is easily mastered. The other takes no time to learn, but a lifetime to master. Now, I share those two as juxtapositions to the idea of the game of business. And I think a lot of people think the game of business is more like the modern board game that is complex, but shallow, right? There's so many moving parts. You have to spend forever reading the book. You're like, whose turn is it? Then what happens? You just did that thing. Is that even allowed? Let's go back to the rule book, right? Like that's how most people approach the game of business. And they're constantly reading in that first game. Anytime you play a game for the first time, there's like all this learning and failing that goes on, and you're trying to figure out how the thing even works, right? That's how most people are approaching the game of business. But the reality is that the game of business, in my experience, and the people who win it, they approach it more like a chess game. That it's simple, but deep. And they don't get so lost in the depth of the game for where they're at. Because your goal isn't to swim to the bottom of the pool necessarily. It's to swim as deep as you can. Now, the pool can go all the way to the center of the earth. You could go all forever, right? That's the beauty of business. Elon Musk, he's far deeper than you. He can hold his breath and go far deeper than you can, but you don't have to worry about that. You just go as deep as you can in that moment, and then you come back up. So the game of business, if you can just simplify it and just pull back the complexity a bit and just narrow it down to 4 different areas, which is make people aware that you exist, get those people to buy your product, turn them into customers, deliver a product, and keep money in the bank. That's kind of it. Like it's a little cliche, but and maybe overly simplistic at first glance, but it truly is. If you can make people aware that you exist, which is marketing, that is the act of advertising to make known. If you can bring people into your sphere, make them aware that you exist, and then two, to sell them, to convert them, to turn them from a lead into a customer, and then to deliver the product to them. And then behind that is just to keep money in the bank, because that's the whole purpose of the business in the first place, right? That's kind of the scorecard upon which we're playing the thing. And that's really it. If you could add on one layer above that, as you start to grow, and you'll add on this complexity, which is the systems, the processes, and the people. As you start to build, and you'll need to work with and through people. And that's a whole other level of complexity. But really, the game is simple. What you need to learn at first is how to make people aware you exist, how to sell them, how to deliver a product, and how to keep money in the bank. Now, within each one of those, this is where the complexity comes. It's a simple game, right? But it's deep. And within each one of those, there's tons of different directions you can go. And this is why people get overwhelmed. When it comes to making people aware that you exist, you could make content on Instagram. You could put out an ad on Facebook. You could do a YouTube video. You could put a sign out on the street. You could have a billboard. You could run a commercial on a TV. You could run a newspaper ad, right? Like you can see there's so many different ways you can make people aware that you exist. And it's because there are so many different strategies behind it that people get overwhelmed and like, where do I start? And the answer is you start with just one. You pick one. That's it. You pick the one that's probably best suited for you and your personality type, your financial resources, your skills, and also is the one that your target demographic, your customer, is most likely to respond to. I sell products to, let's say, 7-figure, 8-figure entrepreneurs, right? A billboard is probably not my best bet. Probably not going to work the best, right? But putting out content on, say, LinkedIn, where I know all those people are hanging out, it's going to have a higher ROI, right? So within each one of these, making people aware that you exist, or marketing, or sales, and then you talk about, okay, what are all the different ways I could sell somebody? You know, is that a landing page with a VSL? Is that sell by chat? Is that a sales script on a call? Like, there's so many different ways of executing the strategy. But the fundamental rule that I want you to think back to isn't that there's 100 different strategies you could execute. It's simply that you need to just have one of those strategies. Because in the beginning, when you're learning chess, it does you no good to have too many plans and strategies you're trying to enforce. That the beginner who just is targeting one goal is going to succeed, whereas the guy who's trying to do 100 different things and he's also a beginner is going to get overwhelmed. He can't hold them all straight. So what do they say? The fool with a plan beats the genius without one. And that's all you need to be, is you need to have a plan and have, okay, what's my marketing avenue? What's my channel that I'm going to bring people into awareness of my existence? What is my one channel for selling them? What is my one product, and what's my one delivery mechanism? And then what is my one financial metric upon which I'm going to measure the success or the failure of this enterprise, right? Just simplify the game. And then as you go, you're going to add in more complexity. As you tap out that one marketing channel and you have more, you can't get more leads from that. Now it's time maybe to put in some cold emails or some Facebook advertising, right? Now you can layer it in. And then you're sitting there doing, $12 million a year versus just doing $120,000 a year. That's the difference between those businesses, is that one just has put more blocks into place, whereas the other is just still executing on the single block. But if you're starting off and you're doing less than $5 million a year, you need fewer blocks than you even think. You don't need to have 20 different avenues for getting new customers. You need to have one that's really freaking good, maybe a backup behind that, so that if it ever turns off, you have some business still coming in, right? But figure out the core strategy that you're trying to execute. Don't get lost in the seemingly infinite complexity of this game. It's not going to do you any good. You're just going to get overwhelmed. You're not going to take the action necessary. So strip the game back and realize that the game of business is simple but deep. And it's going to take you a lifetime to master, but it doesn't take a master to go and make life-changing sums of money, to make life-changing impact on your life, on your community's life, on your customer's life. You don't need any of that. A beginner can be successful. And if that's you, huzzah. So that's going to do it for me. That's all I got. If you are an entrepreneur and you want some help building and scaling, you want to figure out how to get off the ground, we're launching something here shortly called the Launchpad, which is for new and sub-six-figure entrepreneurs. It's a little community with monthly training and masterclasses. If that's you, stay tuned. We don't have anything for you yet, but it's coming very, very shortly. And that's it. See you guys in the next episode.